The champagne flutes were still sweating cold against Nora Reyes's tray when she saw Preston crossing the lawn toward her, and in the space of one breath she did the most reckless thing of her summer. She set the tray on a stone ledge, turned to the tall stranger standing alone by the hydrangeas, and said, "Low and fast, I need you to pretend you're my date." For about 90 seconds. "My ex is coming, and I would rather do almost anything than let him see me standing here by myself." The man looked down at her. He had been watching the water, the whole harbor of it, silver under the July sun, and now he turned that same unhurried attention on her, as if she were a thing worth studying. He did not smile. He did not step back. "Either, your ex," he said. Coming up the path, navy blazer, the walk of a man who has never once waited for an elevator. She pressed her thumbnail into her palm, hard, the way she always did when her voice threatened to shake. "Please, I know how this sounds." Behind them, the string quartet slid into something bright and Italian. The smell of the party was everywhere at once. Cut grass warmed all afternoon, the green bite of the boxwoods, sunscreen and someone's gardenia perfume, and, under it, the faint iron tang of the sea beyond the seawall. 200 guests in linen and pale silk drifted across the Hartwell lawn like petals someone had scattered on purpose, and every one of them belonged here in a way Nora, in her black caterer's dress with rosemary still caught in her cuff, did not. The stranger's gaze moved once, briefly, over her shoulder. Whatever he saw there seemed to decide him. 90 seconds, he said. "What's my name?" Relief hit her so hard her knees went loose. "You don't. It doesn't matter. Whatever you want. It matters if he asks." He shifted half a step closer, and the change was extraordinary. He didn't touch her. He simply angled his body toward hers, tilted his head down as though she'd said something that deserved his full and private amusement, and let one hand come to rest against the stone ledge beside her hip, near, not on. The posture of a man who had chosen exactly where he wanted to be. "Laugh at something," he murmured. "Now would be good." She laughed. It came out too high and half genuine, because the absurdity of it was suddenly enormous, and his mouth finally did move then. The corner of it. "Dry, Nora." Preston's voice arrived before the rest of him, warm and carrying, pitched for an audience that didn't exist. "I thought that was you. God, they've got you working today? On a Saturday?" She turned. There he was, Preston Aldrich, tan from a spring in someone's villa, a glass of something amber sweating in his fingers, and beside him, a woman in dove grey, whose diamond caught the sun and threw it back like an accusation. Preston's eyes did the thing they always did, a quick downward flick, cataloguing her uniform, her flat shoes, the sprig of rosemary. Filing her under the correct heading, the help. "Preston," Nora said. "Small world. Frankly, I didn't know Hartwell used outside people." He said outside people the way other men said stray dogs. "This is Camilla." "Camilla, Nora and I, well, ancient history." He smiled. "We had some good times. Didn't we, Norbug?" The old nickname landed in her chest like a thumb pressed on a bruise. She felt her face begin its familiar collapse into apology, into smallness, into "yes, I'm only here with the flowers," and the stranger beside her spoke. "I keep telling her to work less." His voice was easy, unbothered, and it dropped into the conversation with the weight of a man used to being the last person who spoke in any room. He put out his hand to Preston. "We haven't met. I'm the reason she's here on a Saturday, I'm afraid. I wanted to see the garden she built for my sister's wedding before the crowd trampled it." "You've been trampling it." Preston's hand met his automatically, and something flickered across his face. A small recalculation. The look of a man checking a price tag he'd assumed he already knew. "Your sister's." He glanced at the enormous white tent, the monogrammed aisle runner, the 8-tier confection Nora's own kitchen had spent 40 hours on. "I'm sorry. I didn't catch no." The stranger agreed pleasantly. You didn't. He turned back to Nora as though Preston had already dissolved into the hedge. The peonies opened. You were worried about the heat. They opened, she managed. Then it was worth ruining your Saturday. His hand found the small of her back at last, the lightest pressure, there and gone. To Preston he added, without heat, it was good of you to say hello. Camilla, a pleasure. And that was that, dismissed, gently, without a single raised voice, the most expensive kind of dismissal there is. Preston recovered his smile, but it had gone thin at the edges. Of course. We'll let you. Enjoy, Norbug. He steered Camilla away across the grass, and Nora watched his shoulders, and knew him well enough to see the exact moment he leaned in to ask his fiancée, who is that? And the exact moment neither of them knew. The quartet finished its Italian flourish. Somewhere a cork went off like a soft applause. Nora let out a breath that seemed to have been trapped somewhere near her spine for 2 years. Okay, she said. Okay, that was... Thank you. Truly, you can go back to your hydrangeas. I owe you something. A slice of cake. There's a lot of cake. That was more than 90 seconds, the stranger observed. I'll round up. I'll owe you 2 slices. He didn't leave. He was looking at her again with that still, assessing patience, and now that the danger had passed, she let herself actually see him. Dark hair going silver at one temple, a summer suit the color of wet slate that had cost more than her van, and a face that would have been severe, if not for the fatigue in it, the particular tiredness of a man surrounded by people all day and reached by none of them. There was a signet ring on his right hand. He turned it once with his thumb, and stopped, as if he'd caught himself. He called you the help, he said. He calls everyone something. She reached for her tray. Deflection was the safest room in the house. She moved into it. The dahlias by the tent are drooping in this heat, so, if you'll excuse me, I have flowers to save and 400 profiteroles to guard from the groomsmen. What's your name? Your real one. She hesitated. Nora. Reyes. I do the flowers and the desserts. Reyes and Vale. We're a 2-woman. She stopped. She never said just. She had made herself a small hard rule about that word. Years ago. And she kept it even now. Even tired. Even with rosemary in her cuff. We're a 2-woman shop out of a garage in Cove Point. This is the biggest wedding we've ever done. Reyes and Vale, he repeated, and something moved behind his eyes that she couldn't read. He straightened. He seemed about to say something and then, characteristically, asked a question instead. The 8-tier. With the sugared apricots. That's yours. 40 hours. Don't tell me it's crooked. It's not crooked. He glanced toward the tent, toward the towering pale cake catching the light. It's the best thing at this wedding, and I've been to the wedding rehearsal, the wedding brunch, and 2 dress fittings I was not qualified to attend. For the first time, the tiredness in his face cracked, just slightly, around something warmer. Save your dahlias, Nora Reyes. Thank you for the 90 seconds. It was the most honest conversation I've had all week, and I lied through the entire thing. He walked away across the lawn toward the tent, and 3 separate people peeled off from 3 separate conversations to intercept him before he'd gone 20 feet, hands out, teeth bright. That gravitational hunger she recognized, because Preston used to bend that way toward money too. She watched a silver-haired woman catch his elbow. She watched him go still, very still, and answer whatever it was, and she thought, he does that. He goes quiet before he says the true thing. Then she picked up her tray and went to save the flowers, and did not let herself wonder who he was, because wondering was a door and she had spent 2 years learning to keep certain doors shut. She lasted about 40 minutes. The dahlias, it turned out, were fine. They'd only fainted from the heat, and revived the second she moved their buckets into the shade of the caterer's tent, where the air was 10 degrees cooler and smelled of espresso, scorched sugar, and the sharp cold of the walk-in cooler every time its door swung. Inside that tent was the only kingdom Nora truly ruled. Sheet trays cooled on racks. 120 desserts waited in ranks like a small edible army. And Deanie Vale, her business partner, her best friend since the 9th grade, 5 feet of opinions in a chef's apron, was piping the last of the crumb into a profiterole and watching her over the top of it with the expression of a woman who had seen something. "So," Deanie said. "Don't. So I'm restocking the past trays, minding the entire empire alone, and I look out, and there's my sweet grieving business partner, who has not been on a date since the last presidential administration, laughing like a hostess into the face of the single most powerful man on this whole peninsula." Deanie set down the piping bag. And I think to myself, isn't that nice? Nora's making friends. Nora went cold, then hot. The most what? You don't know. Deanie's grin fell open into pure delight. Oh, this is the best day of my life. You don't know. "Deanie, that," said Deanie, jabbing the pastry bag toward the flap of the tent, toward the bright roaring lawn, was Sebastian Hartwell. As in, the Hartwell wedding. As in, this is his baby sister getting married on his lawn, at his house, on the estate that has his name on the gate you drove your leaking van through this morning. He signed our contract, Nora. His office signed our check. I have emailed that man's assistant 41 times about linens. The tent seemed to tip very gently to one side. Nora put her hand on the steel table. The cold of it went straight up her arm. "No," she said. "No, he was standing by himself, by the hydrangeas. Nobody stands by themselves at their own. Rich people who hate their own parties stand by the hydrangeas. It's practically the definition." Deanie's grin softened at the edges, because she had known Nora a long time, long enough to see under the shock to the thing beneath it. "What did you do, honey?" Nora heard her own voice come out very small. "I asked him to pretend to be my date, to make Preston jealous." She pressed her thumbnail into her palm. "I asked Sebastian Hartwell to be my fake boyfriend for 90 seconds, and he said, 'What's my name?' And he did it. He was good at it. He called Preston out of a conversation like flicking a crumb off a sleeve. And then he told me my cake was the best thing at the wedding, and he walked away. And I let him pay me the world's most humiliating compliment while wearing this." She gestured down at the black dress, the rosemary, the whole uniform of her invisibility. "He knew the entire time. He knew who I was. He read our contract. Deanie, he knew I was the help before Preston ever said the word." Deanie was quiet for a moment. Outside, the officiant's microphone gave a squeal, and a voice asked everyone to begin finding their seats. The ceremony would start in 15 minutes. "Okay," Deanie said. "But here's a question." She picked the piping bag back up, because there were 15 minutes and 40 desserts and the world did not stop for humiliation. It never had. If he knew you were the help, why'd he play along? And Nora didn't have an answer. And the not having of it sat in her chest all through the ceremony, all through the vows she watched from the shadow of the caterer's tent, while the bride, small and radiant and unmistakably the sister of the man by the hydrangeas, promised herself to a nervous man in a grey suit under an arch of Nora's own white roses. She watched Sebastian Hartwell walk his sister down the aisle. She watched him hand the girl over and step back into the front row alone, one empty chair beside him that no one filled. And she watched him not look at the empty chair with the specific discipline of a man who had trained himself not to. He goes still before the true thing, she thought again. And then, what is he like when there's no one to lie to? The reception rolled in on a tide of gold light. The sun slid low and fat over the harbour, turning the whole lawn amber, and the band replaced the quartet, and the profiteroles went out on their silver trays and came back as crumbs, and Nora's 8-tier cake was cut to a sound of 200 people going soft in the throat at once. She was crouched behind the dessert table, refilling a tower of macarons, pistachio, the colour of the sea glass she used to collect as a girl, before she'd learned that pretty things you find for free are worth exactly nothing to people like Preston. When a shadow fell across the tablecloth, and a voice above her said, "There's a problem with the cake." She shot up so fast a macaron rolled off the tower and bounced twice on the grass. Sebastian Hartwell stood on the other side of her table, with his jacket gone. His sleeves turned back to the forearm, his tie loosened, the armor coming off piece by piece as the evening wore him down, and in his hand, on a small plate, a single slice of her apricot cake, untouched. "A problem," she said. Her heart was doing something complicated. "What problem?" "Tell me it's not the ganache. I tempered that ganache like it insulted my mother. The problem," he said, and set the plate down on her table with great seriousness, "is that I've now had 3 pieces, and my sister's photographer keeps finding me at the dessert table instead of the dance floor. And it's becoming a matter of public record." He looked at her. The gold light was in his tired face. "I came to negotiate. I'll stop eating the cake if you'll do me a favor. I already owe you a favor. 2 slices, I believe, which you've now more than collected, different favor." And there it was again, the stillness. He went quiet, and his thumb found the signet ring and turned it once, and she understood that whatever came next was the true thing, the thing he'd been carrying around the edges of his own sister's wedding all afternoon. The man in the navy blazer. "You're Preston. He's marrying into the Aldrich side of the groom's family, which means for the next 3 days, the brunch tomorrow, the sailing thing on Sunday, the closing dinner. He is going to be at every single event on this property, watching every move I make, because he now believes I am worth watching." A dry breath. "You gave me a very useful 90 seconds. He thinks you and I are together, and for reasons that have nothing to do with him, and everything to do with the fact that I cannot get through one more family weekend being managed like a merger, I would like him to keep thinking it." Nora stared at him. The band swung into something slow. Out on the lawn, past his shoulder, she could see Preston, navy blazer, amberglass, and even at this distance she could feel him watching the dessert tent, watching the billionaire lean toward the caterer as though she were the only interesting thing for 100 miles. "You want me," she said slowly, "to keep pretending to be your date. For 3 more days. I want to hire Reyes and Vale to cater the rest of the weekend, which I was going to do regardless, because your cake is criminal." He paused. "And I want to ask Nora Reyes, separately and off the books, to let a lonely man borrow her arm at 3 events so that his aunts stop introducing him to their goddaughters and his board stops sending him widows, and Preston Aldrich spends the entire weekend wondering how a woman he threw away ended up on the arm of the man whose name is on the gate." He held her gaze. "It costs you nothing but 3 afternoons and 1 very good dress. It costs me a great deal to ask, because I do not, as a rule, ask anyone for anything, and you'd be doing me a genuine kindness, which I suspect is a thing you're constitutionally unable to refuse." The macaron she dropped was still lying in the grass between them, pistachio green, going soft in the heat. Nora looked at it. She looked at his forearms, and his loosened tie, and the empty chair she could still somehow see from here, and she thought about Preston saying outside people. And she thought about 2 years of keeping doors shut, and she thought, most dangerously of all, that no one had looked at her the way this man was looking at her, as a whole person, worth studying, worth asking. In a very, very long time. 3 days, she said. 3 events. And a real contract for the food, in writing, at our rate, not your rate. The corner of his mouth moved. At your rate. God help my accountant. Then I have exactly 1 condition. Nora put both hands flat on the steel table to stop them from shaking, and lifted her chin, and made herself say it the way she never let herself say anything anymore, directly, out loud, taking up the room. You don't get to call me the help. Not even as a joke. Not even to sell it. Everyone at this wedding has already decided what I am. For 3 days in front of all of them, you're going to act like you disagree. Her voice caught, and she let it. That's the price. Can you afford it? Sebastian Hartwell went very still. Then, slowly, he picked up the fork and cut a bite of the apricot cake she had built with her own 2 hands and ate it while holding her eyes. And Nora understood, with a small terrifying lurch behind her ribs, that whatever this was, there was no putting it back in the box now. Somewhere out on the amber lawn, Preston Aldrich was watching them and getting everything wrong, and for the first time in 2 years that felt less like a wound and more like a door swinging open. "Wear the good dress tomorrow," Sebastian said. "Brunch is at 11, and Nora..." He set down the fork. "I can afford it." The garage on Cove Point smelled of cold espresso and warm sugar at 7 the next morning, and Nora Reyes had already been awake for 2 hours, standing in front of the rolling rack where her 3 good dresses hung like a very small closet of other people's lives. "The green one," Deanie said, from behind the walk-in door, her voice muffled by the wall of chilled air and the trays she was hauling. "The green one says I own a business and I moisturize. The black one says I'm here to refill your water. The black one is comfortable. The black one is a uniform, you beautiful coward." Deanie backed out of the cooler with a hotel pan of poached apricots balanced against her hip, kicked the door shut with her heel, and the seal thumped closed with that cold exhale Nora had heard 10,000 times. "You told the richest man on the peninsula he wasn't allowed to call you the help. You cannot then show up to his brunch dressed as the help. That's not a look, honey. That's a psychological study." Nora took down the green. It was linen, sleeveless, the color of sea glass, and she'd bought it 2 summers ago for a wedding she never got to attend as a guest. She held it against herself in the smeared mirror by the sink and hated how much she wanted it to work. "He's paying us," she said. "That's the part I keep, Deanie. He's paying us 4 times what this weekend was worth. The contract came through at midnight." His office. His assistant emailed a rate sheet that had our number on it. Our real number. The one we only whisper to each other, and under it he'd written approved as submitted. Who does that? Nobody has ever paid us what we asked. People negotiate us down for the joy of it. So the man has taste. Deanie set the apricots down and looked at her, and the teasing went quiet the way it did maybe twice a year. "What's the part you're not saying?" Nora pressed her thumbnail into her palm. Outside, a gull went over the tin roof, complaining, and somewhere down the lane a screen door banged, and a sprinkler started its slow tick against a hot morning already climbing toward 90. "When I told him our name," she said, "Reyes and Vale." Something went across his face, like he'd heard it before, and then he pretended he hadn't. She turned the dress in her hands. "I've been up half the night, trying to decide if I imagined it." "You imagine nothing. That's your entire problem, and your entire gift." Deanie handed her the keys to the good van, the one that didn't leak. "Wear the green. Save 400 profiteroles, and Nora." She waited until Nora looked up. 3 days. Then he goes back to his gate with his name on it, and we go back to our garage. And you don't let a man who's tired and handsome and generous turn into a door you spend another 2 years learning to shut. "Deal?" "Deal," Nora said, and did not believe herself even a little. The Hartwell estate looked different in the flat white light of Sunday morning, scrubbed of its party glamour, the tent from yesterday half struck, and the lawn scarred with the pale ghosts of 200 chairs. The harbour lay glassy and enormous beyond the seawall, sails just beginning to prick up across it, and the whole place smelled of cut grass gone slightly sour with dew and the low salt breath of the tide going out. Nora drove the van around to the service entrance out of pure habit and had her hand on the wheel to swing it toward the back when a young man in a headset stepped off the gravel and flagged her down. "Miss Reyes?" He had the bright, harassed courtesy of someone whose entire job was other people's mornings. "You're parking out front today." "Mr. Hartwell's instructions. There's a spot held by the fountain. No, the van's a mess. It leaks. It'll stain his. By the fountain, ma'am." He was specific. The young man's mouth twitched. Professional and helpless. He's specific about a lot of things this weekend. So Nora parked her dented catering van between a low silver car worth more than her house and a convertible the color of clotted cream at the foot of a marble fountain where 3 stone dolphins spat water at the sky, and she sat there for a moment with her hands in her lap, in her sea glass dress, feeling the whole architecture of her own smallness try and fail to reassert itself. Then she got out, and the gravel crunched under her sandals, and the morning heat came down on her bare shoulders like a hand, and she went to find the man who'd rearranged the parking of the world so she wouldn't have to come in through the back. She found the family first. They were gathered on the east terrace under a striped awning, a long table laid with white linen and blue hydrangea and silver domes going soft with condensation. And the smell reached her before the sound did. Coffee and hot butter and cut melon, and under it the particular expensive nothing smell of old stone kept cool in shade. There were perhaps 20 of them. And at the head, not seated, standing with a coffee cup held in both hands, like something she was deciding whether to drink or throw, was a woman Nora knew at once could only be Sebastian's mother. She was beautiful the way a cliff is beautiful. Silver hair swept back without a strand out of place, a linen the color of bone, a rope of pearls that had clearly never once been an accident. She was the woman, Nora realized, who had caught Sebastian's elbow on the lawn yesterday and made him go still. And she was looking at Nora now across 40 feet of terrace with an expression of perfect, glacial welcome. "You must be the flowers," she said, as Nora came up the steps. Her voice carried without effort, pitched so the whole table could enjoy it. "And the cake, I'm told." "Vivian Hartwell. My son tells me almost nothing, so you'll forgive me if I ask the questions he won't answer." She extended one cool hand, and her eyes did the same downward flick Preston's had done, but slower, and infinitely more thorough. The sandals, the linen, the hands that Nora suddenly knew were stained faint amber at the cuticle from yesterday's apricots. "Nora, is it? And how exactly did my son come to be walking a caterer around his sister's wedding as though she were a debutante?" The table had gone quiet, in the way tables do. Somewhere down its length a spoon stopped against a cup. Nora felt every eye, felt the old collapse begin in her chest, the reflex 2 years deep. "I'm only here with the flowers. I'm sorry. I'll go. Because I asked him to," said a voice behind her, "and he has appalling judgment." Sebastian came up the terrace steps 2 at a time, hair still damp from a shower, in an open-collared shirt the color of the harbor, and he did the thing again, the thing from the hydrangeas. He crossed the whole terrace and put himself at Nora's side, angled toward her, a hand light at her back. And by the time he'd stopped moving, he had rearranged the entire meaning of the moment without, raising his voice. "Mother, you've met Nora. Nora, my mother, who has never in her life asked a question she didn't already know the answer to, so we can skip to the part where you sit down and eat something." He was already pulling out a chair, the one beside his own, at the head of the table, in the sun. "You didn't have breakfast. You never have breakfast. You were up at 5 worrying about the profiteroles. I was up at 5. Yes." She sat because standing was worse. "How do you, because you told me, at the wedding, that you guard them from groomsmen." He sat beside her. "I retain useful facts." Vivian Hartwell watched her son pour her caterer a cup of coffee with the flat, patient attention of a woman reading a contract for the clause that would cost her. "How charming," she said. "Sebastian, darling, when you have a moment. Your Aunt Cecily has flown in 3 separate young women this weekend, and it would be a kindness to at least learn their names before you break their hearts by being seen fetching coffee for the staff." "They're not staff," Sebastian said. "They're a firm, and Reyes and Vale bill by the hour, so if you keep them talking, you'll get an invoice." It landed light, a joke, the first real joke Nora had heard him make, and half the table laughed because they'd been given permission to. But Nora was watching his mother's face, and Vivian Hartwell did not laugh. She smiled. It was worse. "Reyes and Vale," Vivian repeated, and set down her cup. What an interesting little name. And there it was again, the flicker. Not on Sebastian this time, on his mother. A single beat of something that was not surprise, and was not pleasure. A recognition quickly folded away behind the pearls, and Nora felt the hair rise on her sun-warm arms, because she had not imagined it yesterday. She had not. That name meant something in this family, and both of them knew it, and neither of them was going to say what. "It's my mother's name," Nora heard herself say, into the quiet. "Reyes, and Vale is my partner, Deanie. We started in a garage." She lifted her chin. She made herself take up the room, the way she'd sworn she would. "It's the biggest weekend we've ever had. Thank you for having us on your terrace, Mrs. Hartwell. The melon's very good. Is it from the kitchen garden? I can smell the vine on it." For one long second, Vivian Hartwell looked at her, and something shifted. Some small readjustment of a price already assumed. "It is," she said. "How clever of you." And she turned, deliberately, to the woman on her left, and began a conversation about sailing that had no room in it for a caterer, and the awning snapped once in the harbour breeze. And Nora understood that she had survived the first skirmish, and lost nothing except the illusion that she'd been invited to a war she didn't know the shape of. Under the table, unseen, Sebastian's hand found hers, and pressed once, "Thank you," or "I'm sorry," or "Hold on," and was gone before she could decide which. The sailing came after brunch, because of course it did. The whole party migrated down the lawn to the dock in a drift of pale linen and boat shoes, and Nora, who had a reception dinner to prep and no earthly business on a boat, found herself steered gently toward the dock anyway by a man who had apparently decided her afternoon. "I have 400 profiteroles," she said. "I have a duck to portion. I have Deanie alone in a tent with a blowtorch and a grudge. Deanie has been sent 3 sous chefs and a case of the good butter," Sebastian said, "with my apologies and a note that says please keep her out of my hair for 2 hours," and Deanie wrote back one word. He held out his phone. On the screen, from an unknown number, one word. Finally, Nora laughed, startled, and the sound carried out over the water. "She likes you. That's dangerous. She doesn't like anyone. She barely likes me. I'm aware I'm being handled. I don't mind it from her." He steadied her elbow as she stepped down onto the dock, the boards warm and gritty under her sandals, the whole harbour opening up in front of them, blinding and blue, and smelling of tar and salt and sun-hot rope. 2 hours. Then I give you back to your kitchen, and I go be introduced to Aunt Cecily's goddaughters, and you don't have to watch. This is the part I'm paying for, remember, the arm. You're on the clock." But it didn't feel like being on the clock. That was the trouble, and Nora knew it was the trouble even as it was happening. They took a small sailboat out, just the two of them and a taciturn skipper, who kept to the stern, and the wind came up clean off the water, and the sails filled with a sound like the whole sky exhaling, and Sebastian Hartwell took off his shoes and rolled his sleeves, and became, for 2 hours, a different and much younger man, one who knew the names of the buoys, who laughed when the boom swung and she yelped, who told her, unprompted, watching the shore slide by, that he had learnt to sail on this water when he was a boy, and that it was the only place he had ever been able to hear himself. "Think. My father used to bring me out," he said. The wind took the words half away. He'd cut the engine and just let it go quiet. He said a man who can't stand his own silence has nothing worth listening to. His thumb turned the signet ring once. He's been gone 11 years. I still come out here to argue with him. "Do you win?" "Never." He looked at her, and the tiredness that lived in his face had loosened out here, gone soft at the edges. "You're easy to talk to, Nora Reyes. It's very inconvenient. I hired an arm and I appear to have gotten a whole person. You get the arm at the reduced weekend rate," she said. "The whole person is extra. Send me the invoice." And he smiled, fully, for the first time, and something in Nora's chest that had been latched shut for 2 years slid its bolt and did not tell her it had done it. They came back in as the light was going long and gold, the harbour beginning its slow evening dazzle, and it should have been the good part, the part she'd remember, except that as the skipper brought them alongside the dock, Nora saw 2 people waiting at the head of it, And one of them was Preston Aldrich in a fresh navy blazer, and the other was Vivian Hartwell, and they were standing close together, talking, with the ease of people who had found in each other a shared and useful interest. Preston's face when he saw her step off the boat on Sebastian Hartwell's hand was worth, she would think later, almost everything the last 2 years had cost her. "Nor Bug," he called, warm and carrying, and she felt Sebastian go still beside her at the nickname. "We were just talking about you. Weren't we, Mrs. Hartwell? Small world. Like I said yesterday. Nora and I go way back." "Way back." He smiled at Sebastian, all teeth. "You'll have heard the whole tragic saga by now, I'm sure. Nora tells everyone eventually. It's how she connects. I haven't," Sebastian said pleasantly, "heard any saga. Nora tells me useful facts. Buoy names. Ganache temperatures. She's very discreet about the rest." He stepped off the dock and the boards flexed, and he set himself, quietly, between Preston and Nora, and it was not a large movement, but it changed the geometry of the four of them entirely. "Mother, you've made a friend. Mr. Aldrich has been telling me the most fascinating things," Vivian said, and her eyes went to Nora, cool and bright as the water. "About small businesses, and how difficult they can be, and how one hears things. In a place like Cove Point, everyone knows everyone's ledgers, don't they? Their debts, their little failures. The husband who left, the loan that didn't. Mother," Sebastian's voice did not rise. It dropped, and the drop was worse than any shout, and even the skipper coiling rope at the stern went carefully deaf. "Whatever Mr. Aldrich has been selling you, don't buy it. He's a man who called a woman he claims to have loved the help in front of 200 people yesterday, and I promise you the saga he's so eager to tell reflects worse on him than on anyone in it." Preston's smile didn't move, but the color came up under his tan. "I only meant—" "I know what you meant." Sebastian looked at him with the flat, unhurried attention he'd turned on Nora by the hydrangeas, except there was nothing warm in it now. "You meant to find out what I see in her, so you can decide whether it's real, so you can decide whether you made a mistake. Let me save you the weekend. It's real, and you did." He turned. "Nora, your kitchen needs you, and I need to go be introduced to some goddaughters. Mother, enjoy your new friend." He walked Nora up the lawn, his hand light at her back, and neither of them said anything until they were out of earshot, past the struck tent, into the shadow of the caterer's marquee, where the air went 10 degrees cooler, and the smell of scorched sugar and cold duck fat wrapped around them like a familiar coat. Then Nora stopped. "You shouldn't have said that. The last part, about it being real. It was in character. Was it?" She turned to face him, her heart going too fast, the sea glass dress sticking to her spine in the heat, because it didn't sound like a man selling a story to his mother. It sounded like, "Sebastian, what did she mean? About ledgers? About Cove Point? What does Preston think he knows about me? And why does your mother want it? And why does your mother's face do the exact same thing yours does every single time she hears the words Reyes and Vale?" Sebastian went still. It was the stillness she'd learned to read, the going quiet before the true thing, and she watched him stand at the edge of it, watched the signet ring turn once under his thumb, and for one suspended second she thought he was going to tell her, whatever it was, the thing behind the flicker, the thing his mother had folded away behind her pearls. Then, past his shoulder, a voice cut across the marquee. "There you are." Deanie stood in the tent flap with her phone in her hand, and a look on her face Nora had seen exactly twice before, both times bad. "Nora, I need you. Now." She held the phone up, screen out, and even across the tent Nora could see it was their business email. Open, a message flagged and starred, and read. "It's the bank. About the loan on the van and the kitchen build-out." Deanie's voice was very level, which was how Nora knew. Somebody called them. "This afternoon. Somebody with an account big enough to make them listen, asking questions about our credit, our contracts, whether we're, and I quote, a stable vendor for a client of Mr. Hartwell's standing. She lowered the phone. They've frozen the line, Nora, as of an hour ago. Right in the middle of the biggest weekend of our lives, somebody with money reached into our garage and turned off the lights. The tent was very quiet. Out on the gold lawn, the band was tuning up for the closing dinner. Nora and Deanie were now, suddenly, not sure they could afford to finish. And Nora turned back to Sebastian Hartwell, to the stillness in his face that had not broken, that still had not given her the true thing, and heard her own voice come out cold and small and afraid. An account big enough, she said. A client of Mr. Hartwell's standing. She took one step back from him, and the gravel shifted under her sandals. Was it your mother, Sebastian? Or was it you? And Sebastian Hartwell, who retained useful facts, who had rearranged the parking of the world so she wouldn't come in through the back, who had told her on the water that she was easy to talk to and inconvenient and a whole person. Sebastian Hartwell opened his mouth and closed it and did not say no. Say it, Nora said. Say it wasn't you. That's all you have to do. 3 words, and I'll believe you. Because I'm a fool, and I've been a fool all weekend, and I would like to keep being one for another minute. Her voice cracked on the last of it. The walk-in cooler behind her exhaled its cold breath, and the smell of scorched sugar and cold duck fat sat thick in her throat. Say it wasn't you, Sebastian. It wasn't me. He said it steadily, and his eyes did not leave hers, and that was almost worse, because a liar would have blinked. I did not call your bank. I did not touch your loan. I would not know how to begin, and if I wanted you gone, I'd simply not have paid the invoice. His thumb found the signet ring. It turned once. Stopped, but you asked me 2 questions in that tent, and I only answered one, so before you decide I'm clean, ask me the other one again. Deanie was still in the flap, phone lowered, going carefully still herself now, because she had known Nora long enough to feel the floor move. Was it your mother? Nora said. The band tuned up out on the lawn, a long note bending flat and then true, and somewhere a champagne tent was being raised for a dinner that Reyes and Vale could no longer be certain they could pay to finish. Sebastian looked at her for a moment that went on too long. I don't know, he said, and I hate that I don't know. Because the honest answer should be no, and I can't make my mouth shape it. He exhaled slowly, the way she'd watched him do on the dock before he told her about his father, the tell of a man walking up to a thing he'd spent years walking around. My mother has moved money to make people disappear before. Quietly, kindly, she'd say. She calls it protecting the family. And this afternoon she stood on my dock with Preston Aldrich, and 40 minutes later a garage in Cove Point went dark. He shook his head once. That's not proof, but it's a shape I recognize. A shape. Nora laughed, and it came out wrong. Thin and bright and terrible. You keep useful facts. You said so. You retained my profiteroles and my ganache and the buoy names. So retain this one. An hour ago my whole life got smaller because somebody in your family decided I was a problem. And you knew. The second Deanie held up that phone, you already knew whose hand it was. And you still stood there and let me ask. I let you ask because you deserve to watch me not be able to lie about it, he said. I could have. I'm good at it. I lied to 200 people yesterday with a hand on your back, but I told you there'd be no calling you the help, and I meant a larger version of that than either of us said out loud. So no, I'm not going to stand in my own kitchen and perform innocence for you when I can smell my mother's fingerprints on it. The cold of the steel table had climbed all the way into Nora's chest. Behind her, Deanie said. Very quietly, Nora. Dinners in 90 minutes, 210 covers. The duck's portioned, the tarts are in the blast chiller, and if we walk now we don't just lose the money, we lose the name. Our name. On every phone at that table. She swallowed. I need to know if we're cooking. And there it was, the choice, laid down between the racks and the cold, and Nora hated all of its faces. "We're cooking," she said. "Nora, we're cooking, Deanie, because our name is the only thing in this tent that's actually ours, and I am not letting Preston Aldrich watch us run." She turned back to Sebastian, and the sea glass dress stuck to her spine, and she made herself take up the room the way she'd sworn she would even now, even with her hands shaking against the steel. "You're going to find out, tonight, whether it was her. And you're going to tell me the truth about the other thing too. The name, the flicker, whatever your mother folded away behind her pearls this morning, because I am done being the only person at this party who doesn't know what she is. You said you could afford my one condition. This is the rest of the bill." Sebastian held her eyes. The band found its key. "I'll get you the truth," he said. "All of it. Even the part I've been keeping from myself." He stopped at the flap, half in the gold light, half in the cold. "Cook your dinner, Nora Reyes. I'll go and speak to my mother." He went. And Deanie handed Nora a chef's coat over the sea glass dress, without a word, because there are kindnesses that don't need any, and the two of them turned back into the small kingdom that was still at least theirs, and began to plate a dinner for the people who had frozen them out. The closing dinner unrolled under a canopy of calf lights strung between the oaks. The harbour gone violet, and then ink beyond the seawall. The whole estate breathing out the day's heat in slow gusts that smelled of warm stone and salt, and the citronella the staff had set burning at the lawn's edge. 210 guests in their third and finest set of clothes drifted to their tables. The duck went out under its glaze. The tarts came back as smears of crumb, and one lipstick print on a fork. And Nora stood at the pass in her borrowed coat and ran the line with the flat, fast competence that was the truest thing about her, and did not let herself look for Sebastian, and looked for him constantly. He wasn't at the head table. Vivian Hartwell was. She sat at the center of the family like a stone in a setting, pearls catching the calf lights, and beside her, 2 seats down, close enough to lean, sat Preston Aldrich, telling her something behind his hand that made her mouth curve. Camilla's diamond flashed on the far side, and the chair at Vivian's right, the one that should have held her son, stayed empty. The way the front row chair at the ceremony had stayed empty, and Nora watched Vivian not look at it with the exact discipline she'd watched Sebastian not look at his. They're the same, she thought. Whatever he is, she made it. "Table 9's asking for you," said one of the sous chefs, materializing at her elbow with the harried courtesy of a man carrying a message he'd rather not. By name, the lady in the pearls. She'd like to compliment the caterer personally. Deanie, plating the last of the tarts, went still. "Don't," she said. "Low, Nora. That's not a compliment. That's a summons. And you go out there in a chef's coat over a nice dress and let her stand you next to that table like a specimen. She wants me to come as the help," Nora said. In front of Preston. So he can watch. She untied the coat. Underneath, the sea glass linen was creased and coffee spotted and hers. "So I'll go as the caterer she paid full rate for. There's a difference, and she's about to learn I know it." She crossed the lawn to the head table, with the calf lights swinging small shadows across the grass, and the band playing something low, and the whole long table turning toward her the way tables do. Vivian Hartwell set down her fork. "There she is," Vivian said, warm as frost. "The garage genius. Everyone. This is Nora. She and her friend built that extraordinary cake yesterday, out of nothing, out of a converted garage in Cove Point. Isn't that marvelous? One does admire the scramble of it. Sit. Sit. Oh, but you're working." "Of course. I am working," Nora agreed. 210 covers. The duck was a risk in this heat, and it held, so I'll take the compliment and get back to it, Mrs. Hartwell. Thank you. She did not sit. She did not shrink. She let the silence sit a half-beat too long and watched Preston's smile tighten, because he had come to see her made small and she was declining to perform it. "So capable," Vivian murmured. "Your mother must have been a capable woman too. Reyes." She turned the name over, tasting it, and her eyes came up bright and cold and terribly interested. Elena Reyes, of Cove Point. She had a little business once, didn't she? Flowers, small parties. Years ago, before your time in it. The lawn tilted. Nora's own pulse went loud in her ears. Louder than the band. Louder than the harbor. You knew my mother. I knew of her. Vivian lifted her wine, unhurried. Everyone in a place like this knows of everyone. Their triumphs. Their overreaches. The loans they couldn't carry when a season went wrong and a client changed their mind. She smiled, and it was the same smile from the terrace, the one that was worse than laughter. It's a small world, as Mr. Aldrich keeps saying. And history has such a way of rhyming, doesn't it? A Reyes woman, a garage, a dream too big for the money behind it, and a bank that suddenly wants its questions answered. A sip. One does hope you've learned from her example. It would be a shame to fail in exactly the same shape. It was as clean a stroke as Nora had ever felt taken against her. It told her three things at once: that Vivian had known who she was before brunch, that the Hartwells and her mother had a history with teeth in it, and that the frozen loan was no accident, all delivered as hospitality, in front of Preston, who was watching with the bright hunger of a man being handed the ending to a story he'd wanted for 2 years. Norbug's mother had a rough go, Preston offered, gentle as a knife going in sideways. It's sort of the family talent. Big dreams. Thin cushions. You always said a great many things, Preston, Nora heard herself say, and her voice did not shake, which astonished her, and I stopped taking dictation 2 years ago. She looked back at Vivian. What did your family do to my mother, Mrs. Hartwell? The table had gone entirely quiet. A calf light swung. Down its length, a woman's bracelet clinked once against a glass and went still. Sebastian, Vivian said, not to Nora, to the dark at the edge of the lawn. In the pleased voice of a woman who has arranged for her son to arrive on cue, your caterer is asking me questions about your father. You should be the one to answer them. You've clearly been so eager to. Nora turned. Sebastian was crossing the grass, out of the shadow of the oaks, and his face, in the swinging light, was the stillest she had ever seen it. Not the going quiet before the true thing, but the after of it. The face of a man who had gone to speak to his mother and come back holding something that had cost him to pick up. Mother, he said. That's enough. Is it? Vivian rose, pearls swinging, and for the first time all weekend her composure showed a hairline down its middle. You brought her onto my terrace. You changed the parking, Sebastian. You humiliated your aunt in front of 3 perfectly suitable young women. You sat this girl at the head of my table in the sun, and did you plan to tell her whose name she's carrying? Or was that going to be my job too, along with everything else I clean up in this family? I said that's enough. He didn't raise his voice. He never raised his voice. It dropped, and the drop went through the whole table, and Preston Aldrich found something fascinating in his wineglass. Sebastian looked at his mother, and then he looked at Nora, and Nora watched him make a decision she would think about for a long time afterward. The decision to say the true thing in the worst possible place, out loud, in front of everyone, because she had asked him to, and he had said he could afford it. Elena Reyes did the flowers for my parents' anniversary party, he said, 22 years ago. I was a boy. I remember the house full of white peonies and a woman laughing in the kitchen with the staff instead of hiding from them. My father liked her. He liked her enough to back her. A loan, a real one, to grow the little business into a real one. His jaw worked, and then the season she needed it, there was a bad quarter and a nervous board, and someone in this family decided the loan was an exposure we couldn't carry, and called it. All of it. At once. He did not look away from Nora. It broke her business. She started again from nothing, and she named the thing she rebuilt after herself, out of spite, or pride, or both. And she taught her daughter to do the same, and that daughter walked up to me at a wedding 2 days ago and asked me to be her fake date, and when she told me her name, I knew exactly whose kitchen those peonies came from. The silence had teeth now. You knew, Nora said. The calf lights blurred at the hydrangeas. You knew who I was. I knew whose daughter you were, Sebastian said. I did not know you. Those are different, and the second one is the one that happened to me on that boat, and I would give a great deal to have told you the first before this woman got to do it for me. His eyes went to his mother, and there was something in them Nora had not seen, something that had broken loose from 11 years of not looking at empty chairs. It was you. Wasn't it? Not my father. He signed the loan. But he'd never have called it. You called it, and you let me spend my whole life thinking it was a thing the market did to a stranger, and today you did it again. To her, from a dock, because you saw the way I looked at her, and you decided to fail her in exactly the same shape before I could stop you. Vivian Hartwell's face did a thing then that Nora had not thought it could do. It held, and then, for one instant, at the corner of the mouth, at the eyes, it did not. The pearls seemed to weigh her. The calf lights found the fatigue under the powder, and she looked for a heartbeat. Not like a cliff, but like an old woman who had made a decision 22 years ago and been alone with it ever since. Then, it was gone, folded away, and she reached for her wine. I protected this family, she said. I have always protected this family. You'll understand when it's yours to protect. She did not look at Nora at all. The girl can finish serving the dinner she was paid for. We're none of us obliged to enjoy the history. Nora. Sebastian took a step toward her. Nora, let me. But Nora was already stepping back, and the grass gave under her sandals, and the whole lawn of calf lights and violet water and 200 turned faces swung once around her like the boom coming across the wind. Because it was one thing to be underestimated. She had built a life inside being underestimated. She knew its rooms. But this was something else. This was learning that the man who had rearranged the parking of the world, who had said she was easy to talk to and inconvenient and a whole person, had known from the first 90 seconds that her name was a wound in his family, and had let her laugh into his face and step off his boat on his hand and open a door she'd kept shut for 2 years. All of it. Every hour of it, on top of a thing he hadn't told her. You had 2 days, she said. Her voice had gone very quiet, quieter than the band, and Sebastian went still to hear it. On the water. When you told me about your father cutting the engine to hear himself think. You could have told me then. When you signed our real rate and wrote approved as submitted like it was nothing, like you weren't paying off a debt your family made, and never told me existed. You could have told me then. She pressed her thumbnail into her palm so hard it hurt. You said the 90 seconds was the most honest conversation you'd had all week. But you lied through the whole thing. You told me so yourself, and I thought you meant Preston. Her breath caught. You meant me. I meant I hadn't earned the truth yet, Sebastian said. I was going to. When? She was crying now, and she let it, because she had spent 2 years not letting it, and it turned out to cost more than it saved. After the weekend? After I was safely back in my garage with your money and your mother's questions in my bank, and no way to tell which kindness was real, and which one was a payment. You gave me the best afternoon I've had in 2 years, Sebastian, and you knew the whole time that it was built on my mother's ruin, and you let me have it anyway, because it felt good to be looked at by a man who already knew all my secrets and hadn't told me a single one of his. Around them the calf lights swung, and the band, sensing nothing, slid into something slow and golden. And Preston Aldrich watched from the head table with an expression that had curdled from triumph into something closer to unease. Because even he could see that whatever was happening on the lawn had stopped being about him a long time ago. Nora. Sebastian's voice dropped to almost nothing, and for the first time it wasn't the practice drop, the one that quieted rooms. It was a man with the floor gone out from under him. Don't. Please. I have never said please to anyone in that tone in my life, and I'm saying it now. Let me fix the loan. Let me fix all of it. Give me 1 day and I don't want you to fix the loan. She was shaking her head, backing toward the caterer's tent, toward the cold and the sugar, and the one small kingdom that was still hers. That's the whole, Sebastian. That's the whole thing. Your family breaks a Reyes woman's business, and then a Hartwell rides in and fixes it, and we're all so grateful. And nothing ever changes. And the gate still has your name on it, and my mother's name is still just an interesting little name on a garage. I don't want to be fixed by you. I wanted to be told the truth by you. And you had 2 days and a boat and every chance in the world, and you chose the afternoon instead. Deanie was at the tent flap. She didn't say anything. She just held the seam open, the way you hold a door for someone coming in out of weather, and the cold breath of the walk-in reached across the grass, and Nora went toward it. The dinner's finished, Nora said, without turning around. Every cover. The tarts are out, the coffee's on, and Reyes and Vale honored the contract, which is more than the Hartwells ever did for the last woman by that name. You'll get our final invoice. Pay it or don't. But we're done here tonight, and I'm done being the only person at your family's party who didn't know the shape of her own history. She stopped at the flap, one hand on the canvas, and looked back at him across the swinging lights, and the sea beyond the seawall breathed its slow iron breath into the dark. You should go sit in the empty chair, Sebastian. It's been waiting for you all weekend. She went into the tent. Deanie let the flap fall. And in the sudden cold, among the cooling racks and the last curls of steam and the smell of scorched sugar going stale, Nora Reyes put both hands flat on the steel table that had held her up all weekend. And finally, quietly, came apart. While out on the lawn, alone at the edge of 200 people who had come to celebrate a wedding, Sebastian Hartwell stood in the swinging calf lights and did not move, and did not look at the empty chair at his mother's right hand, and understood that he had lost, in a single evening, the only honest thing that had happened to him in 11 years. Behind the tent canvas, Deanie's phone lit up in her hand. She looked down at it. Her face changed. "Nora," she said slowly, and there was something in her voice that cut clean through the crying, some new weight that hadn't been there a moment ago. "The bank. They just sent another one." She turned the screen. "It's not about the freeze." Her thumb hovered. "It's a wire. Incoming, tonight, from an account I've never seen, not Hartwell's office, not his assistant. A private account." And Nora, she looked up, and the calf lights swung small and gold across the canvas between them. "The name on it is Alina." Nora stared at the name until it stopped being letters. Alina, her mother's name, lit up cold and blue on Deanie's phone, in a tent that smelled of scorched sugar and the metal breath of the walk-in. And for a moment the whole roaring world outside the canvas, the band, the calf lights, the 200 people who had watched her come apart, went very far away. "That's not possible," Nora said. "My mother doesn't have Deanie. She rebuilt on card tables and a second-hand oven. She has a Christmas Club account and a coupon binder. She doesn't have an account that wires anything to anyone, let alone tonight. Let alone," she stopped. The steel table was cold under her palms, and she pressed down harder, because the cold was the only thing telling her which way was up. "How much?" Deanie turned the screen so Nora could see it, and Nora read the figure, and read it again, and the number did not get smaller. "That's not a wire," Nora whispered. That's 20 years of somebody's life. There's a memo line." Deanie's thumb hovered, then landed. She read it out, and her voice, which could tease the paint off a wall, had gone as careful as a person carrying something over ice. It says, "For Alina Reyes, held in trust, overdue," and then there's a name on the authorization. She looked up. "It's not Vivian. Nora, it's not Sebastian either. The account belonged to a Charles Hartwell." The name went through Nora like the cold off the cooler door. Charles Hartwell, Sebastian's father. The man who had cut the engine on the harbour to hear himself think. The man who had liked her mother enough to back her, whose empty chair had sat at the front row of his own daughter's wedding, and at the right hand of his widow at dinner, waiting all weekend for a son who wouldn't look at it. He's been gone 11 years, Nora said. Then, somebody just reached across 11 years and turned the lights back on. Deanie set the phone down on the steel between them, screen up, that impossible number glowing. Out on the lawn, the band bent a long note flat and true, and a champagne cork went off somewhere like a small, wrong applause. Nora, an hour ago someone in that family froze us, and now someone in that family is trying to give us more money than the garage is worth. Both things are true tonight. I need you to go find out which Hartwell is which, because I have plated my last tart and I am fresh out of guesses. Nora untied the borrowed chef's coat and hung it on the rack where it belonged. Underneath, the sea glass dress was creased and coffee spotted and hers, and she smoothed it once with both hands, the way her mother used to smooth an apron, before walking into a room that hadn't invited her. Held in trust, she said. Overdue, she pressed her thumbnail into her palm. He set it aside. Before he was gone. Restitution for what they did to her. Her voice caught on the enormity of it. And somebody sat on it for 11 years. Somebody with pearls, Deanie said. Somebody with pearls. Nora went to the flap. The night beyond it was violet going to ink, the harbour breathing its slow iron breath past the seawall, the calf lights swinging their small gold shadows across the scarred grass. Finish the coffee service. Send the sous chefs home at 11. On the clock, with the good butter. They earned it. She lifted her chin. I'm going to go get the truth. All of it. He said he'd bring it to me. I'm done waiting on the porch for a Hartwell to decide I'm ready. She stepped out into the heat, and the citronella smoke stung her eyes, and she went looking for the man whose name was on the gate. She did not find Sebastian first. She found his mother. Vivian Hartwell was not at the head table anymore. The head table had thinned to a wreckage of napkins and half-drunk wine, and one forgotten wrap slung over a chair. The family scattered to the dance floor and the dark edges of the lawn, and Nora, crossing toward the house to look for Sebastian in the lit windows, came around the corner of the seawall path and stopped. Vivian was alone at the end of the dock. She stood where the boards ran out over the water, pearls pale against the bone linen, and she was not composed. That was the thing Nora would keep. The cliff had come down. Vivian Hartwell held an envelope in both hands, old paper, soft at the folds from years of handling, and she was looking at it the way a person looks at a door they have walked past every day for 11 years and never once opened. The harbour slapped and sucked at the pilings below her. The wind off the water lifted a strand of the silver hair she never let move, and she did not fix it. She turned the envelope over, and over again, and her thumb moved across the front of it, the way Sebastian's moved across his ring. The same gesture worn into a different hand, and for one long moment, the most powerful woman on the peninsula stood at the edge of her own dark water, and did not know she was seen. Nora did not go to her. Some instinct older than her anger held her still in the shadow of the boxwoods, the warm stone smell of the wall against her back, and she watched Vivian Hartwell lift the old envelope once, almost to her chest, the way you hold a thing you have finally decided to set down. Then Nora stepped back, quietly, onto the grass, and let the dark keep her, and walked on toward the house, because there are things a person has to be allowed to do without an audience, even a person who has earned none of your mercy. She found Sebastian on the terrace where the brunch had been. The awning was struck now, the long table bare, and he stood at the balustrade with his back to the house and the whole ink harbour spread below him, sleeves still turned back, tie gone entirely. A man with his armour on the floor around his feet. He didn't turn when her sandals found the stone. He'd have known the sound of her by now, she thought, the way he retained ganache temperatures and buoy names, and the fact that she never ate breakfast. You spoke to her, Nora said. I did. His voice was rough at the edges, sanded down, twice, once before dinner, when she told me nothing, in the beautiful complete sentences she uses for that, and once after, after you went into the tent." He set his hands flat on the balustrade. "That's when she gave me the envelope, and then she took it back and walked down to the water with it, and I let her. Because I have spent 11 years learning that there are 2 hours a year my mother can be reached, and this was one of them, and I did not want to waste it on my own hurt feelings." "Tell me about the account." He turned then. In the light from the lit windows, his tired face had gone open in a way she had not seen. Not the practiced stillness, not the going quiet before the true thing, but the true thing itself, out and unshielded and costing him. "My father set it up 22 years ago. He said it plainly, the way he'd told her about the engine on the water. The season your mother's loan was called, he was traveling. He came home to find it done. The family had moved. The board had been soothed. The exposure handled. My mother handled it. She's very good at handling things. His jaw worked. He couldn't undo it. The business was already gone. The humiliation was already public. You can't unring a called loan. So he did the only thing a proud man does when he can't fix a wrong he allowed. He opened an account in Elena Reyes's name, and he put into it, every year, what the loan would have grown to. With interest, as if it had never been called. For 22 years. For 11 of his own, and then his breath went out of him. Slow, he left instructions. That on a particular occasion, when it could be received as a gift and not a guilt payment, it was to be delivered to Elena Reyes with a letter in his hand. My mother was the executor. My mother decided the occasion never came. He looked at her. "I did not know it existed until an hour ago, Nora. That is the truth. I knew whose daughter you were. I knew my family broke your mother's business. I have known that shape my whole life. But the account, the trust, the letter, that was the thing my mother kept even from me. And when I stood in that room tonight and made her give me the rest of it, I understood that I had spent my life managing a family that was managing me, and that the one honest transaction any of us ever attempted, my father made in secret because he didn't trust the rest of us to allow it." The harbor breathed below them. A calf light on the lower lawn swung and threw its small gold across the grass and went dark again. "She released it tonight," Nora said. "The wire. It's already come." "She released it," Sebastian said, "after I told her that if she didn't, I would, publicly, in front of the board, in front of every name she's ever protected. I told her I would stand up at the next shareholder meeting and read my father's letter aloud into the minutes." His mouth moved, without humor. "It was the first time in my life I have ever threatened my mother with the truth instead of with money. I think it frightened her more." Nora's eyes stung, and she let them. "That's not the same as being honest with me." "No," he agreed. "It isn't, and I'm not going to pretend it is." Nora came to the balustrade and set her own hands on the cool stone, a careful arm's length from his, and below them the tide pulled at the seawall, and the smell of salt and cut grass gone sour with the day's heat wrapped around the two of them in the dark. She had come out here, full of a speech. She had built it in the tent while she hung up the coat, all the sharp, true things she'd earned the right to say. And now, standing beside him with the whole ruined party glittering below, she found she only wanted one of them. On the boat, she said. "You told me your father cut the engine so he could hear himself think. And I sat there in your borrowed afternoon and I thought, this is a man who tells me true things. That's what undid me, Sebastian. Not that you're rich. Not even that your family broke my mother. It's that you sat in that quiet you loved so much, in the one place you go to be honest, and you let me believe I was hearing the whole of you." Her voice thinned. "Why? You had the water. You had the wind. Nobody was watching. Why not then?" He was quiet for a long moment, and it was not the strategic quiet. It was a man looking for the bottom of a thing. "Because I have been managed my entire life," he said finally, "by people who wanted the version of the truth that kept me useful. And on that boat, for 2 hours, you talked to me like I was a person and not a merger, and I was so afraid of what it would cost me to hand you the one fact that would make you look at me the way everyone at that gate looks at me. Like a name, like a ledger, like a thing that broke your mother, that I chose the 2 hours. His thumb found the signet ring and turned it, once, and stopped. It was the most selfish thing I've done in 11 years, and I'd have called it protecting you, if you hadn't stood in that tent tonight and shown me exactly what that word costs the person it's aimed at. I heard my own mother in my mouth. I've been trying not to be her my whole life, and there I was, protecting you into a smaller room. The word landed between them, protecting, the same word Vivian had used on the dock, kindly, and Nora watched him hear it land, watched him refuse to look away from it. I don't want your father's money, Nora said. I know. I mean it. Send it back. Give it to a school. I don't want to be a debt your family finally paid so it could feel clean. It's not mine to send back. He said it gently. It's your mother's. It has her name on it, and it's had her name on it for 22 years. And whatever you and I are or aren't after tonight, that is a letter and a gift from a man who thought about your mother every year of his life until the last one, and you don't have the right to throw it in the harbor to punish me. That belongs to Elena. You take it to her, and you let her decide, and you keep your quarrel with me separate from the one honest thing my father ever managed to do. He exhaled. That's not me fixing you. That's me getting out of the way of something that was never mine. And that, more than anything he'd said, was the thing that cracked her. Because it was true, and it cost him, and he'd said it knowing it gave him nothing back. Below, on the lower lawn, a voice she knew too well came carrying up through the dark, warm, pitched for an audience, and Nora turned, and saw Preston Aldrich crossing the grass toward the terrace steps with the loose, certain walk of a man who had decided the evening's drama was an opportunity and not a warning. There she is, Preston called up. Nor bug. I've been looking all over. That was quite a scene at dinner. Quite a scene. You always did have a gift for those. He came up the steps 2 at a time, uninvited, and his eyes went from Nora to Sebastian and did the flick. The cataloguing flick, except this time it snagged, because the arithmetic had stopped adding up in his favor. Mr. Hartwell, I think there's been a misunderstanding, and I'd hate for it to color your evening. Whatever Vivian and I were discussing, it was only ever meant as, well, looking out for you. A man in your position, a woman with Nora's history. Stop, Nora said. She said it quietly, and it stopped him, which surprised them both. You called the bank, she said. Didn't you? You didn't have the account big enough to freeze a loan. You never had money, Preston. That was always the tragedy of you. You had the walk and the blazer and other people's villas. But you had a name to whisper. You stood on that dock, and you handed Vivian Hartwell my mother's history like a party favor, because you saw me step off a boat happy, and you could not stand it. Her voice did not shake, and she marveled at that, distantly, the way you notice weather. You didn't come here to warn Sebastian about me. You came to watch me get small again. It's the only thing that ever made you feel tall. Preston's tan went blotchy under the terrace lights. That's, Nora, that's a hell of a thing to say to a man who's about to be family. You're not about to be family. Camilla's voice came up the steps behind him, cool and clear, the dove-grey woman with the accusing diamond, and she stood at the top of the stairs with her wrap over her arm and an expression that had done its own quiet arithmetic. I've been listening for a while, actually, from the wall. You're very loud when you think you're winning, Preston. It's your least attractive quality, and there's a list. She looked at Nora, and something almost like an apology crossed her face. Woman to woman. I hope your mother takes every cent. Camilla. Preston turned, reaching, and she stepped back out of the reach with the practiced grace of someone who had been reaching for the door a while. Go home, Preston, she said. You've had a lovely time. You've made everyone here understand you completely. And she went down the steps into the dark toward the lit windows and the taxis, and the diamond went with her, throwing back the calf lights one last time, like an accusation finally aimed at the right man. Preston stood on the terrace with his mouth working, and no audience left to pitch his voice at, and Sebastian looked at him with the flat, unhurried attention he'd first turned on him by the hydrangeas 2 days ago, and said, without heat, the most expensive kind of dismissal there is, "You were leaving." And Preston Aldrich, tan from a spring in someone's villa, the walk of a man who had never once waited for an elevator, went down the steps and across the scarred lawn, and out through the gate with his name on nothing, and the dark took him, and he was gone. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The band had wound down to a single guitar somewhere. The harbour slapped the wall. Nora realized her hands had come off the balustrade and were pressed flat against her own sternum, holding something in, and she made herself lower them. "He's gone," she said. "He's gone," Sebastian agreed. He did not move toward her. That was the thing she noticed, that he stood exactly where he was, arm's length down the balustrade, and let the space be hers to keep or close. A man who had finally understood that reaching for someone and getting out of their way could be the same gesture. "I'm not going to ask you for anything, Nora. I've decided that. You told me I had 2 days and a boat and every chance in the world, and I spent them being a coward in a good suit. And you're right. And I'm not going to stand here and ask you to forgive it just because the villain left and the music's nice." His voice roughened. "But I am going to tell you one more true thing, and then you can go back to your kitchen, and I'll pay your invoice and change my own parking for the rest of my life. On that boat I said I hired an arm and got a whole person. I want you to know that I knew, the second I said it, that I'd never wanted anything the way I wanted to be the kind of man who'd earned the whole person. That's the truth I was keeping from myself, not the trust, not my mother. You." The guitar found the end of its song. Down on the water, a mooring bell rang once, thin and clear. Nora looked at him, the silver at one temple, the tiredness that had loosened out on the water and gone tight again all evening, the ring he turned when he walked up to a thing he'd spent years walking around. And she felt the door she had kept shut for 2 years, the one Deanie had warned her about that very morning in the garage, standing open on its hinges with the summer night pouring through it, and she understood that she was the only one of the 2 of them who could walk through it now, because he had finally, deliberately, taken his hand off the latch. "I'm not going to hold your hand because my ex is watching," she said. "Those days are over. I did that once, 90 seconds, and it turned my whole life sideways. I know, he's gone. There's no one here to make jealous. There's no one here to sell it to. If I do anything now, it's only because I want to." Her voice caught, and she let it, because she had spent 2 years not letting it, and it had cost her more than it saved. "You understand the difference. It's the same difference you made about being paid full rate and being seen. I need you to know, I know it." "I know it," Sebastian said. Very low. "It's the only version I'd take." And Nora Reyes, in her creased, sea-glass dress, with Rosemary long gone from her cuff, and her mother's name wired into her ruined little kingdom of an account, and the whole Ink Harbor breathing beyond the wall, closed the arm's length of stone between them, and took his hand. She did it the way you do a thing you've decided, plainly, taking up the room. His fingers were warm, and they went still in hers, and then they closed. Careful, like a man who could not quite believe the transaction, and she felt the signet ring cool against her palm and did not let go of it. "There," she said, unsteady, into the small space between them. "Now nobody's watching. Now it's real." Sebastian let out a breath that seemed to have been trapped somewhere near his spine for 11 years. He did not pull her in. He simply turned his hand so their fingers laced, and looked down at them together in the terrace light with the frank, studying attention he'd first turned on her by the hydrangeas, as if her hand in his were a thing worth learning by heart, and when he spoke his voice had the crack still in it. You should know I retain useful facts, he said. I'm going to retain this one. She laughed, wet and startled, the sound carrying out over the dark water. That was almost a joke. I've been practicing. Deanie sends me material. He turned her hand over in his, thumb passing once across her knuckles. She texts me one dry observation a day. Unsolicited, this morning's was about your dress. She did not. The green one means she likes you, he quoted. Do not screw it up. I've screwed it up, he looked at her. I'd like the standing chance to unscrew it, at your rate, in writing, for considerably longer than a weekend. Behind them, from the direction of the dock, came the deliberate sound of heels on stone. Unhurried. And they turned, still holding hands, and did not let go. Vivian Hartwell came up the terrace steps into the light. She had put the cliff back together. The strand of silver hair was where it belonged. The pearls hung level. But something in the reassembly showed the seams now, the way a repaired thing does to anyone who saw it broken. She held the old, soft, folded envelope in both hands. She looked at her son's hand laced through the caterer's, and she did not flinch from it, which was, Nora would think later, the first honest thing she had watched the woman do all weekend. I've released the account, Vivian said. Her voice carried, from long habit, but there was no audience for it now, and stripped of its audience it sounded merely old. You'll have seen. Your friend will have seen. She held out the envelope. She did not cross the last few feet. She made herself walk them, and Nora understood the cost of the walk. This is not mine to keep either. My husband wrote it the winter before he passed. He asked me to deliver it, on a good day, when it could be received as a kindness. I decided no day was good enough. Her thumb moved once across the front of the paper, the worn gesture Nora had watched on the dock. That was a lie I told myself for 11 years. The truth is, I could not deliver it without admitting what it was restitution for. And I have never in my life been able to afford that admission. She set the envelope on the bare terrace table, within Nora's reach, and stepped back. It's for your mother. Charles's hand. I've kept it dry. Nora let go of Sebastian and picked it up. The paper was soft as cloth. On the front, in a slanting fountain pen hand gone brown with the years, it said only, Elena, from a man who should have telephoned. And below the name, in the same hand, smaller, I always thought your peonies were the finest thing that house ever held. Nora's eyes flooded. She read the line twice, and did not trust her voice, and did not try to use it. I won't apologize to you, Vivian said, and Nora looked up, and the old woman's chin was level. You'd be right not to accept it, and I've never learned to do it in a way that isn't managing the room. But I'll say the thing I can afford. She looked at her son, and then at Nora, and the seams showed all the way through. I was wrong to call the loan. I was more wrong to keep the letter. And I was wrong on that dock this afternoon, when I looked at the way my son was standing next to you, and decided to fail you in the same shape before it could cost me anything. That was the worst of the three, because I did it knowing exactly what it was. A breath. I've told the bank to lift the freeze tonight, and I've told my son I'll not be handling the family any longer. He can hand himself. God help him. And you, apparently, she almost smiled, and it was nothing like the smile that had been worse than laughter. It was just tired. The melon really was from the kitchen garden. You were right about the vine. My husband planted it. She turned to go, pearls pale in the dark, an old woman who had set a thing down after 11 years and did not yet know how to stand without carrying it. At the top of the steps, she paused, not looking back. Sebastian, she said, the chair at dinner. Your father's chair. Her voice, for just a moment, lost its carry entirely. I keep it for him because I don't know how to keep him any other way. You've never understood that. I hope you never have to. And she went down the steps and across the grass toward the lit house, and this time no one watched her not look at anything, because both of the people on the terrace were looking only at each other. Nora held the letter against her chest. I have to take this to my mother, she said. Tonight, she's up. She's always up. She does the farmer's market at dawn on Sundays even now. Even after everything, she'll be sorting flowers in the dark, in a garage that smells exactly like ours. Her voice broke fully open at last, and she let it. And it was not the collapse she'd feared her whole adult life, but something closer to a window thrown up in a hot room. She thinks the loan just, that the world just did it to her. That it was the market, that it was nobody. I get to drive across the peninsula tonight and tell her it had a name, and that a man thought about her every year of his life, and that her peonies were the finest thing that house ever held. She pressed the letter to her mouth. Do you understand what you've given her? Not the money. This, I didn't give it to her, Sebastian said. My father did. I just finally got out of the way. He picked up his jacket from the balustrade and held it, not putting it on, a man unsure of his welcome in the very next minute of his own life. Nora, may I? He stopped. Started again, and it plainly cost him, the asking. The thing he did not, as a rule, do for anyone. May I drive you? Not to fix anything. Not to be a Hartwell arriving in the dark to make it right. Just because it's an hour across the peninsula and you shouldn't take a letter like that to your mother by yourself, and because I would like, very much, to meet the woman who grew the finest thing that house ever held, and to tell her I'm sorry, in my own voice, at my own cost, on her own doorstep. He turned the ring, once, and made himself stop. If it isn't too much to ask. Nora looked at him, the great house behind him, the ruined party, the mother going in alone, the harbour he came to when he needed to hear himself think, and she thought about doors, and about 2 years of keeping them shut, and about the fact that the only ones worth having are the ones you open yourself. Deanie drives the van home, she said. You follow us in whatever that silver thing by the fountain is. And Sebastian, she held up the letter, and then, deliberately, held out her free hand, palm up, in the swinging light. An offer, and not a rescue. You don't get to call my mother the help either. Not even to be charming. Everyone's already decided what a Reyes woman is. You're going to walk into that garage and act like you disagree. The corner of his mouth moved, the dry warmth she'd first coaxed out of him by the hydrangeas. I can afford it, he said, and took her hand, and this time it was he who could not quite believe the transaction, and she who held on. They found Deanie at the tent flap, with her arms crossed, and her phone in her fist, and the whole story already read on her partner's face. She looked at the two hands laced together. She looked at the soft old envelope. She looked at the billionaire holding a catering firm's final invoice in his other hand like a man clutching a ticket he intended to keep. The freeze lifted 11 minutes ago, Deanie said. Bank sent a groveling little note. Autocorrect turned sincerely into sorcery, which felt about right. She narrowed her eyes at Sebastian. You, the green dress worked, I see. I want it on the record that I called it at 7 this morning while she stood there hugging a uniform. It's on the record, Sebastian said gravely. I retain useful facts. Deanie's mouth twitched, fought it, lost. Oh, he's got jokes now. Wonderful. That's exactly what this family needed. Another Hartwell who thinks he's funny. But she was already turning for the van keys, already softening, already, Nora could see it, deciding to let this one door stay open. Somebody's mother is sorting dahlias in the dark right now, with no idea her whole night's about to turn over. Let's go ruin it in the good way. They drove across the peninsula in the summer dark, the van in front, and the silver car behind, and the warm night came in through Nora's open window smelling of cut hayfields and cooling asphalt, and, as they came down the last hill into Cove Point, the low green river smell of the marsh and the faint sugar and cold espresso ghost of every garage kitchen on that road. The lights were on in the Reyes garage. They were always on before dawn on a market Sunday. And through the open bay door, Nora could see her mother, Alina Reyes, silver-threaded, apron, on, humming something to the buckets, sorting stems in a pool of yellow light with the exact tilt of the head Nora saw in the mirror every morning of her life. Nora sat for a moment in the dark, with the letter in her lap, and Sebastian's headlights steady in the side mirror behind her. 90 seconds, she said, to no one, or to the letter, or to the man an 11 years gone father had asked to wait for a good day. It started with 90 seconds and a fake date to make an idiot jealous. Then she got out, and the gravel crunched under her sandals, and the warm night came down on her bare shoulders like a hand, and she walked into the light where her mother was, carrying a truth that had waited 22 years to be delivered. And behind her a man who was no longer pretending anything at all cut his engine, the way his father had taught him, so he could hear himself think, and then followed her in. Elena Reyes looked up from her dahlias. She saw her daughter's face, and the soft old envelope, and the tall stranger hanging back respectfully at the edge of the light, with his hands open at his sides. And because she was Nora's mother, and had taught her everything Nora knew about taking up a room you weren't invited to, she set down her flowers, wiped her amber-stained hands on her apron, and said, warm and unafraid, into the sugar-scented dark, well, you'd both better come in. There's coffee, and whoever this is, he looks like a man who's been standing at the edge of things far too long. She smiled at Sebastian, and it was Nora's smile, and it undid him where he stood. Come sit down where I can see you. Nobody worth knowing ever stays by the hydrangeas. And that, a garage full of flowers before dawn. A letter finally in the right hands. A mother pouring coffee for the son of a man who'd loved her peonies. And two people who'd stopped pretending holding on to each other in the yellow light. That was where the long summer that started with 90 seconds, finally, quietly, came home. If this story warmed something in you tonight, stay a moment before you go. Like this video so more hearts can find it. Subscribe to Platinum Diaries for a new, clean, heartfelt billionaire love story every week. And tell me in the comments, if a stranger by the hydrangeas offered you 90 seconds, would you have been brave enough to ask? I read every one. Until the next story, take good care of your heart. You never know who's about to cut the engine, and finally, hear you.